So in this panel, we'll be exploring how migrant artists use contemporary art to preserve cultural traditions while embracing new influences, examining the role of technology, interdisciplinary collaboration and community engagement in maintaining cultural diversity in the arts. I'd like to give a very warm welcome to Daniela Bianco-Duppen, who will moderate the panel. Daniela is an Italian-British art advisor and director of Artscapy, an innovative art and tech platform. And she's been joined by Sarah Lecongsong, who's the founder and director of SLQS Gallery, a contemporary art gallery committed to platforming women and queer artists across generations and based in Shoreditch. Alice Burnhope, we've already had a little about, the award-winning textile artist and educator based at the Cockpit studios in London. Péjú Oshin, who's a British-Nigerian curator, writer and lecturer based here in London, and Dr. Shwetal Patel.
We can go back to the same image, please, thank you. The white is reminiscent to mother of pearl, which is also used in Vietnamese craft. And to go back to the story of l'École des Beaux-Arts, which was mainly taught to male artists, is the impact of French colonialism into essentially modifying that cultural tradition of using lacquer and mother of pearl mostly in furniture, and now using it in art. So it's merging French and Vietnamese traditions to create a French modern art. And what contemporary artists now do is to question, through this artwork, what lacquer looks like, what mother of pearl looks like, elevating nail art, which is supposed to be sub art, into high art. And also,
something that is confined to women, really, within the women sort of sphere, the domestic as well.
100%, yeah, the domestic. And if you look at these two, there's two women that are depicted into this artwork. The woman on the left actually is a reproduction of one of the most famous painting by a Vietnamese artist called Toc Ngoc Van, who was part of that Beaux-Arts movement. And it's a really famous painting called Woman with Lily. And it's depicting a woman that's in a very demure position, which is also, again, the Western male gaze on colonialism, repeating the same, depiction of women. And what Hoa has done as a contemporary artist is that she's reproduced this artwork, but she's inserted a woman who is naked, and also thinking about the female gaze on women. So
let's also move to the second image that you wanted to talk about, the other artist. I think let's focus on, this is very interesting as well. Is there like a relief? What is the material here that is used?
Yeah, so this is a Vietnamese artist who is based in Vietnam. She's called Giong Thuy Nguyen. It is embossed aluminium with a frame that is made in wax. Embossed aluminium comes from her own upbringing. Her parents were selling scrap metal, so she has lived with metal around her home. And the wax is really rooted in tradition in Vietnam of speaking to our ancestors. In Vietnam, we almost say that the dead are more important than the living. You go to them for advice. You introduce your partners to your ancestors. So they're very much part of your daily life. And you burn a candle and you burn an incense. And you give them offerings. If they liked smoking, you give them a cigarette. If they liked a coffee, you give them a fresh coffee every day. And so that's very much part of, this is, maybe I can speak about this in the second question.
But it's quite interesting, actually, when you touch upon the fact that they take the traditions from the past and then they carry that through their work and contextualize it into the present.
Yeah.
What they're feeling right now. And I think that's a very interesting point you're making.
Yeah, I think it's important that, art is about transformation and is about evolution. And it's about, we are constantly shifting our ways of thinking. If you think about feminism, we are in fourth wave feminism. We even question what is fourth wave feminism. And so I think it's important of contemporary art to not just reproduce tradition, but to recontextualize it in our current context.
Thank you so much. This is very powerful. Thank you, Sarah. We're going to move now to Alice. Alice is a textile and performance artist, and we're going to try actually to show some of your work. And we are so lucky to actually have your work here in this building. Mm-hmm. It's going to be unveiled in the room next door. So you've been really a key part of this project. You also just carried out a workshop in Lewisham, which we're going to talk about in your presentation. And so I wanted you to talk a bit more about your work, the context, within this practice, and the importance of textile as well in your work.
Yeah, sure. Well, hello guys, I'm Alice. So I see myself as more of a socially engaged artist. So I work with community groups and Skillshare. So my role is a facilitator to create this sort of neighbourly, inclusive space where people can come together, talk, share stories, lived experiences and ambitions. And from there, we use the language, or the common universal language, of textiles. Everyone has a link to textiles. You're born with textiles. You have a link with heritage, generational, like if your grandma or granddad did knitting, for instance. So we take the language of textiles and stitch work, and then we go into a workshop setting. And
we're going to show actually a video now while you're speaking.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. What is your performance, correct?
Lovely. We go into a workshop setting and we find this common connection through the textiles and through making. And when we're making, we're in a very meditative state. We're in this deep state, which actually unlocks theta brain waves. So it allows people to learn. It allows people to sort of empathise with those around you. And from completely different backgrounds as well, and from learning from different people, different backgrounds, through the skills of sort of textiles, it unlocks something. And then we take that, we co-create all these sort of stories, individual voices, and make it into a collective artwork, which we can then just interact with and play with, as you can see above. So my work, I'd see, is, as I said, like a facilitator, coming together to create a collective, and from there, make this sort of a monument, a celebration, an interaction where it goes into public realm that people can interact with and sort of start to have more conversations, empathise and really connect with each other.
You said a very important word, monument, because that's what comes to my mind when I look at the video. It's almost like you're creating like a monument, like a totem almost of
Brian,
and a choreography. Can you tell us about that? I found that very fascinating.
So this piece is called Stone Upon Stone, and this was a residency over in Jersey for a year, where I was sort of plonked in to look at the land and the people's connection to the land, their heritage, their cultures. And as I was walking around Jersey, I don't know if anyone's been, there's loads of little dolmens everywhere, so loads of little Stonehenges. And their geology is so unique to Jersey. It's going to be a UNESCO site soon. So we're looking at the geology, we're looking at these forms and how their Neolithic forebearers would come together, move these massive boulders to create this artwork. So we were doing this with textiles, and they were actually naturally dyeing the textiles, they were embroidering the textiles, they were working with the textiles. So all these stories were being embedded into this piece, where I came in as a fabricator to start to make it. And then at the end, people could play and engage with it. And this film was beautifully shot by Catherine, who is over here.
It's absolutely beautiful. And I think the image that we're seeing now is more about the second project that you did for the Biennale, and it's for a workshop in Lewisham. Yeah. And it's talk more about the engagement with the community. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about like how do you engage them in your work and the context of it?
Yeah, of course. So this took place on the 20th of October over in Lewisham at Manor House Gardens. So we were literally going out in the gardens and calling people in, come in, interact, let's have a play. We laid out the textiles and I had natural dye inks that I made, pens, which were really accessible. We laid out the textile and we were like, what is your connection to each other, the land and Lewisham? So people were starting to either draw cat for cat food, for instance. They were doing We Love Lewisham, etc. And then we also had embroidery workshop next door that I was facilitating, and we're taking all these stories, all these motifs, placing them onto textiles, and then I came in to create a big piece, which you'll see soon. And it was all about what is your story, and therefore the echo of migration, which is the name of the artwork. So yeah, I just see myself as like the medium between everything to help.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you see yourself more as a mediator, facilitator.
Yeah.
Rather than just I come as an artist, this is my work, and then you sort of interact with it. You're more like co-creating the work with the community. How do you see yourself, doing that?
I feel like I try to create a space, and everyone, I believe absolutely everyone is an artist. It's just enabling or giving you the chance to unlock that creative voice through traditional techniques or drawing, etc. And I'm just there to help jump you along to being the artist and creating the artwork, that then everyone can be like, oh my God, you are so cool, and look what you've made. That's amazing. We can't wait to see your work. I can't wait to see it. Cheers.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Alice. We're going to pass on now to Péjú. And I know that you created an incredible exhibition at Gagosian Gallery in 2023 called The Rites of Passage, which was the first exhibition you created for the gallery. And we're going to see actually some images of this exhibition. And you can sort of tell us a bit more in depth about the concept, how you came to this title, and the artists that you brought, and the project, really. So thank you.
Thank you. And I just want to say thank you to my fellow panelists so far. You've been really insightful, and there's so much that you've both said that I really resonate with, so thank you. So thank you, Daniela. So yes, I did curate an exhibition in 2023 at Gagosian Gallery called Rites of Passage. This is a first installation image here.
By the way, this was the last exhibition in the Britannia Street space.
It was.
After that, it closed down. But that's a space where normally you see Dammenhurst taking over.
Yes.
And like major, large exhibition. And they sort of gave you the space and like, here is your white cube box. And then here you are. And you just completely took over that.
Yes.
So,
thank you for also giving that context. You're right. I think it makes that project feel all the more special because it was the last ever show in that space, and I know that many people have been there over the span of a couple of decades and really enjoyed a lot of the shows that have been presented there. And so in thinking about this show, I was really thinking about these ideas of migration because it's something that's personal to me. As a British Nigerian curator, I've constantly thought of myself between these two worlds. And so thinking about this idea of the in-between and thinking about liminal spaces is something that I've been thinking about unknowingly my whole life. So I suppose I really fleshed out what that language looked like for me perhaps in the past 5 to 7 years.
So Péjú and I know each other,
yes.
But I remember when you were first thinking about the exhibition and you showed me the plans, it's also about color for me.
Yes.
So you enter a room and a space and you have to feel something. So I remember you talking to me about this blue.
Yes.
So how that connects to the show?
I'm so glad that you remember all of this stuff.
I do.
So thinking about that particular shade of blue, there were lots of different reference points, but very particularly, I suppose a few things I was thinking about is this idea of where the land meets the earth. The sky, and kind of what does that look like in between. And I was thinking about all of these various shades of blue, but then also from a really personal standpoint, I was thinking about kind of these indigo dyes which are used in Nigeria to make adire in northern Nigeria, and thinking about lapis lazuli, which also within its properties really promotes this clarity of thought. So these were some of the things that I brought together, and so we did quite a few test shades of blue, and I was just like,
can we move actually to the second image, because I think you also have a very interesting,
Yes.
Not only you had in terms of mediums, you had textile, sculpture, installation. It was really much photography, I remember.
Yes, we did.
It was pretty much across all sorts of different mediums.
It was.
But what was the role of textile, for example?
So the role of textile was really important, and so this work that we can see on the screen is by the artist Victor Ehikameno, and so he is a Nigerian-American artist. And again, just for a bit of context, we had 19 artists in the show, and they're all working between the African continent, the UK, and the US. And so we really wanted to explore this idea of, I suppose, these shared identities which developed across all of the artists. Some of them knew each other, some of them didn't, but it was really wonderful seeing a lot of these commonalities that existed between them. And so thinking very particularly about textiles and the role of that in the show, we know that there are some complicated histories around textiles and this idea of migration. And so particularly thinking about this work, Victor made this work in his studio in Nigeria, and it's huge. I think it's about 9 foot by 3 foot wide. No, sorry, that's meters, sorry, much bigger than that. So 9 meters long by 3 meters wide. And actually the work itself is hung on the ceiling. And what you're looking at is a mirror reflection on the floor. So we had the whole floor of that space transformed and covered in mirrors. So actually it became interactive, so people were actually a part of the artwork. And if you couldn't already tell, this work references the whole of a slave ship, and thinking about the various people that would have been on that ship in moving across continents. And I think what's interesting, Victor utilised a lot of lace, and so for Nigerians, lace has become something which is really important in our everyday wear, and particularly for parties. But of course, this lace was never really produced in Nigeria, and you know, there's always been this thing about, oh, it's Swiss or it's Italian lace, and so on and so forth. And one last point that I just want to make on this is that he also utilised these rosary beads as well. So I think there were no less than 20,000 rosary beads which were used to create this work, and those also came from China. So again, there's this really interesting history or kind of contemporary context of how things move products from various continents.
One question that came into my mind is like how you, of course, oversaw the whole curation of the exhibition, but how did you think that all these artists connected to the theme of like what was the undercurrent like in terms of like migrant artists, like how can you connect them all together? Was there a thread between them?
I suppose the main thread was that all of these artists are of the diaspora, and so in me having built some of these personal relationships with them, and also having encountered their work at various places such as art fairs or in museums, I felt that there was something that spoke to all of them in that sense, and so actually their work started a dialogue in that space together, which I thought was really impactful.
Yeah, so we have one last image for you, and the first thing to notice for me is the barrier, the net.
Yes.
So that probably relates to either separation or a border or the sea.
Yes.
So can you tell us about it?
Of course. So this work is by the artist Julia Knox. And this work is particularly important. So actually it's called In a Whirlwind of Encounters. And so it came from a series of videos, installations that he'd been developing, which look at the idea of the masquerade. And the masquerade is, again, something which became a recurrent theme within the exhibition. Again, in thinking about these ideas of textiles, because I suppose me and Julian had a number of conversations in the studio, and that was something we were just like, okay, this is really interesting to us, because the masquerade doesn't just exist within African culture, but it also exists in different cultures around the world. But still this idea of this figure that is supposed to embody our ancestors, and that's why I really related to what you were saying about, you know, the dead almost being much more important than the living. And we talked a lot about that and this idea of a disbelief in kind of what do you see with your eyes? Does it really exist? If a group of people are there, kind of as a collective, those people know that that thing existed, but if you weren't there, you'd be in disbelief about what happened. And so again, I think this became really important in thinking about textiles because Julian's also from Sierra Leone. So as, you know, not everyone, but there are a group of people who are returned from various places in the African diaspora, and so I think that makes it much more vibrant in thinking about the different textiles which you use in the garment of the masquerade, because there are these little things that you can pick out which kind of exist in various cultures, which tell this much I suppose, much larger and interesting narrative of how we as a people are all products of migration, because I think that was one of the things that I spoke a lot on when giving tours of this exhibition, that even for somebody who is from the north of England moving to the south, that is migration. So we all have this kind of shared experience of moving.
Yeah, we don't think enough about the fact that within the same country there's even migration within that. But then, of course, I mean, I'm a migrant myself because I come from Italy into the UK. And so that's the other layer that you add into everything that you do. And then we're pretty much all migrant here as well. So that's connection. But thank you so much, Péjú. That was great. And we're going to move to Shwetal now. And you bring, I think, something different to the panel in a sense that your experience is more into the Biennale, the Kochi Biennale, which you are co-founder. And
audio to this, we can have the
audio. Is there an audio for this video that we can show, maybe? So is this... So just, I want to also... Exactly.
Can we start?
I feel I'm a veteran of the Biennale here. Interested to see that the curator, Shubhi Rao, who is from Southeast Asia, included a lot of Southeast Asian artists whom you ordinarily wouldn't see outside the region, and who I don't think figured as much in previous Biennales, which had more of a focus on South Asian artists. So I think that's something new this time around, and something that definitely reflects the background and the interests of the curator in charge. The principal themes are the principal historical and political themes of our period. Issues that involve unequal treatment, lack of opportunities. There's also a concern, particularly here in South Asia, with issues of gender violence. So, I think they're political themes, but I think they've been treated as artists treat them, not as news media or historians treat them, in a very evocative way that often contains fewer facts but communicates better than other types of presentations. The Biennale includes a lot of artists I wasn't familiar with, like artists who haven't had this sort of platform before, and I think that's a very good thing to do. And I think these regional biennales are important both to bring the local context to people who might not ordinarily attend exhibitions like this within the region. So they have an important role to play within their region, but also to make it easier for an international audience to keep up with what's happening in South Asia. So I think on both counts, it's an important biennale.
So let's...
well, the Kochi Biennale has always been very well done, absolutely from the
we don't need to play the whole video. Let's just
that is
dig into the
about it
conversation.
Is that the curator...
So thanks so much for this introduction. And could you tell us about this experience as co-founder of the Kochi Biennale, and how do you see the role of artists within that context?
Thank you. And thank you to my fellow panelists and to the team here for organizing this today. Can you hear me? Speak up.
All good.
The genesis of the Kochi Biennale was in 2010 the Minister of Education and Culture, who belongs to the Communist Party of India, Marxists, who are democratically elected Communist Party in Kerala, wanted to do something with art and culture, visual arts in the state. And he met two colleagues of mine, the two co-founders, to canvass ideas. And the idea was that, you know, India needs a Biennale. In 1968, Nehru had started, India's Prime Minister had started the Triennale in Delhi. And this was the first Triennale in the world, actually. And it sort of floundered by the 80s and 90s, and there was a vacuum, I think. There was a very strong commercial art scene. I would say quite moribund national institutions, but they were there. And Kerala, I think, was the perfect site. Going back, maybe people are familiar with Kochi and Kerala, but maybe Muziris, many people are not familiar with. It's an ancient port. It's probably a region in Kerala on the southwest coast of India. And for thousands of years, the Phoenicians, the Greek, the Chinese, Arabs, the first place Judaism travels to outside of the Holy Lands, Islam, Christianity, different stages. And so this idea of pre-Enlightenment cosmopolitanism. And of course, they were coming for trade. You know, this was the only known source of pepper in the world. And 13th century, there was some sort of cataclysmic event, probably a sort of tsunami, and Muziris gets covered. I wanted to
ask you actually, how do, so we talked about the Kochi Biennale and the fact that is 90% of the audience is Indians, it's local. So how do you see the communities coming together, doing like, what's shifting, what's changing in the local culture when the Biennale happens?
I think, so to my point earlier, that I think it's always a very diverse and culturally rich place. This idea that cosmopolitanism, multiculturalism is a concept, you know, it exists in many parts of the world for you know, throughout history. So you have a very, very tolerant society where people are allowed to practice their religion, their faiths, their belief systems, and live coexisting in relative peace. So I think this is a very good condition for biennial such as this. Also, Kerala is famous for its extremely high literacy rates. And this, again, is to do with human development, successive state governments prioritizing human development over purely economic development. And so that literacy, you know, curiosity around literature from around the world, cinema from around the world, I think really created, you know, this was the foundation that we built on. We wanted to do an international biennial. I think it's often the case that in the global south, you know, the arts councils, embassies bring, you know, famous artists from their countries to exhibit, and, you know, artists from those countries don't have those same opportunities to exhibit in international forums. It's usually the, you know, function of the market that kind of brings artists from, certainly from South Asia, into the purview of the West.
And is there a particular artist that you want to talk to us about who maybe had a lasting impact in the Biennale?
Well, this is the reason I wanted to show this video, and it's Raul Zurita's work at the 2016 biennial. He was very moved by the migrant crisis in that period. Gulub Kurdi, the young Syrian boy, who he and his brother, I think to the point that Zurita is making, were lost at sea trying to cross the Mediterranean. And so Zurita made this work in Kochi based on this tragedy, but again, I think reflecting on it as a poet. I don't know if any... Raul Zurita is a very important Chilean poet who was incarcerated by the Pinochet regime, several decades of practice, and he was the first artist that we invited. We felt it was important.
It's so interesting, though, that we go back to the theme of water as a connection through everything, the blue, the water, the video of these artists, also like linking everything together.
That's right. Well, Zurita makes the point that it's a common good of humanity, And actually, we've created borders not just on land but in water as well. And the sea has become a graveyard. And so, this was a very important work at the biennial. Does it have a lasting impact? I think the biennial as a whole has had a profound impact on Fort Cochin. It was really a tourist place. People were coming to sort of maybe see some things, some dilapidated buildings, some old museums. But now it has been revitalized through contemporary art. There's definitely a local pride in the Biennale. When I go, I often get asked, why can't the Biennale be every year? And I have to sort of say, look, we have to do it every 2 years.
Thank you. We are almost at time, but I wanted to ask everyone if you want to do some quick sort of closing remarks. So, Sarah, if you want to maybe start first, and yes. Anything that came from the panel, any reflection on it?
I think what came from the panel, so we've talked about different diaspora, but actually there is a communal experience between the experience of migration, and I think actually, that makes us one of the biggest population of the world, really. So we're not a minority. we didn't have time, but I wanted to, one thing that we were talking about was actually how does contemporary art actually brings these migrant experiences together. And we had this exhibition called Only Your Name, which we touched upon briefly. And it was really interesting because we talked about the sea, and the Vietnamese experience has very much been about migrating after the end of the Vietnam War. And the Vietnamese diaspora in the UK has arrived because when the boats left Vietnam and arrived in Hong Kong was a British colony at the time. And so the reach of empire goes beyond its border. But we don't have time to talk too much about it, but I just wanted to say that if you want to know more about the reach of empire and its borders, we did a brilliant artist talk with the artist and Jelena Sofronovic, who's here somewhere in the room, and he's got a brilliant podcast called Empire Lines, which specifically looks at the relationship between art and empire, and I think it's something that we've all touched upon today.
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Alice, over to you.
I think just listening to everyone, I think it's finding that common ground between people. When you find that common ground, you can then empathise, understand, and through there celebrate each other and unite. So I think it's just listening and empathising and celebrating who we are and embracing that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think perhaps some of my reflections and listening to everyone is really thinking about art as this site for negotiation and thinking about, I suppose, our individual but also collective identities. I think that's a real big thing that's come out through the panel today.
Thank you. That's beautiful.
I think Homo sapiens have always been on the move in the evolution of human history. It enriches where we go. We bring with us food, music, ideas, art. It makes the world a more interesting place. I'd like to challenge this nomenclature around who's a migrant, who's a visitor, who's a guest. I think these are very highly political terms, which I think we need to also consider.
I think it's hard to put everything into definitions, right? We
Absolutely.
like to, but actually we can't.
Absolutely. More migration.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Don't go anywhere. Don't go. There's questions. Don't go. There's questions. That was some super remarks to finish our first panel from today. There is a few minutes if anybody has any questions. You must ask one now because I've come back onto stage especially. I've got a question. I think there should be somebody with a microphone. There should be somebody with a microphone?
If not, we've got a spare one.
When is this?
Thank you very much. Firstly, I just wanted to add with Sarah's gallery as well. I think a lot of the important work that you do is not just about empowering artist women, but also the practitioners that you choose to work with, whether they're people who make podcasts or your communications team or other curators. And it's very important to think about this as a systemic change. And I think that's something that your gallery is doing really well. So I wanted to thank you for that and point that out as well. But I wanted to raise a point about biennials, not just in terms of thinking about serving local publics and audiences, but how they can be quite sustainable models for supporting local artistic production. And I wondered whether Shwetal wanted to maybe speak about this, in that you were talking about commissioning artists' work. For instance, the Bukhara Biennial that's just opened this year is very much premised on all of the artists making the work, A, specifically for that biennial, and B, by working with local artisans and artists and craftspeople. So just the importance of that, I suppose, in biennial models.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's important to mention that all biennials are really quite different. You know, apart from the word biennial in their title, my research suggests that they're all founded for different reasons. Their local context has a huge impact on how they end up, progressing. Models differentiate, funding models differentiate, curatorial models differentiate. So I would be really cautious to kind of generalize around biennials. I think absolutely, from what I've read around the Bukhara Biennale, but also other biennials, work that is site responsive, made with local practitioners, involves the community in some way, does have a larger impact. And I think, famous biennials like Venice or Documenta, I think, Venice, I think, is a really particularly acute case where the biennial does seem to be quite removed from the local context. I think this is something that's a kind of existential crisis for Venice, and I think how can the biennial really improve the lives of people that live in Venice? So I think, it's really difficult to summarize. I think we, as in Kochi, really prioritize trying to ship less and get artists to work more with local materials and so forth. But each biennial is different, and each edition of each biennial is different. So.
Thank you, Shwetal. Any other questions for this panel? Okay, in that case, sorry.
Thank you very much. This question is for the whole panel. I don't know if we're going to have time for everyone to ask, so maybe she'll ask.
Short question, short answers.
Okay. I really love the reference to existential crisis, and I think it may come down to subjectivity on that. What would everyone's perspective be on the existential crisis of the art model for biennales?
That's quite a big question.
It is, but I tried to make it short.
How can you answer that in briefly, panel? You've stunned them into silence.
I don't think it's just about biennials. I think, when I was reflecting on today, we're at the Royal Society of the Arts. It's a 270-plus year organization that's been advocating for a lot of these things that we're discussing. So these are not new debates. I think we definitely need reform, educational reform. I think it has to start. There has to be more investment in education. Every single primary school child in this country should have access to the arts. Funding has been cut in local authorities. So that to me is an existential crisis for the creative industries in this country. And biennials are just a part of that ecosystem. But so are galleries, so are museums, so are project spaces, residencies, art schools. So I think there are kind of major and radical policy reform that's probably required now.
Sorry, does that answer we're all in existential crisis, the whole arts. Yeah. Well, on that note, that was a cheery finish. We hope we can solve some of those issues today, maybe. But a huge thank you to Daniela, Sarah, Alice, Péjú, and Shwetal. Thank you so much.